Supposed to begin. I want to welcome everybody for being here, in particular on the screen that I'm sharing space with. An honor to do so. I have two people. One is Rachel Har, who is, Rachel, tell us your specific title in regards to United Hatzalah.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Canadian Director for United Hatzalah. And we'll let Gavi, obviously, and the rabbi talk about the organization. But we're a small but growing organization here, obviously headquartered in Toronto, but we have a presence all across Canada. And all of our efforts go towards support the fundraising efforts and support for the organization in Israel.
Thank you. And at the bottom of the screen, we're very honored to have Gavi Friedson, who's a transplanted American to Israel and retransplanted back to America. And Gavi is, Gavi, you're the North American Director of United Hatzalah?
So I'm the Director of International Emergency Management and Global Ambassador. So I serve under Eli Beer, who's the founder. And really, when he's in Israel and can't travel under these circumstances with Corona and everyone being locked down, I'm really that second person that takes his place and travels all over to share that message.
Wonderful. Fantastic. So we have a wonderful program for all of you who are joining us this evening, in particular, something that, well, it touches us very close to our hearts. And those of us who are in Canada, who are suffering and lamenting over the paucity of vaccines, our feelings of frustration and, well, anger in some corners is only exacerbated by the phenomenal success that Israel has had in its distribution and implementation of the vaccination program. And one of the things that we're going to explore with the help of Gavi is to take a peer into the inner workings of how and why Israel's vaccination program has been so remarkably successful. In fact, for those of you who might be inclined to do so after our program tonight, if you're inspired by it, and I'm sure you will be, you can go to your Twitter feed. And for those of people who don't know what a Twitter feed is, ask your grandchildren, they'll help you. And you can go to your Twitter feed and you type in hashtag vaccination, and it'll come up. Vaccine Nation, all that remarkable thread about how remarkably successful Israel has been. But let's turn the page very quickly now. And anybody who has spent time in Israel, and I suspect that most of you in the phone call certainly has, you've all certainly been in traffic jams throughout the country, and then you've always been amazed at these small scooters that have an ambulance sticker on them that are skirting in and out in between the cars on their way to some emergency or another. Those motorcycles, well, not motorcycles, actually scooters, that are equipped to carry medical equipment are the children of the brainchild of United Hatzalah and Eli Beer. And one of the things that we're going to explore with Gavi is exactly how United Hatzalah has transformed the landscape of healthcare in Israel, and most probably how it is an important blueprint for urban areas throughout the world, how they can improve the delivery and implementation of emergency care to people. But first, to get us started, as I said to you before, our guest this evening is Gavi Friedson, who is the Director of International Emergency Management for United Hatzalah, which is Israel's leading volunteer community-based EMS network. United Hatzalah works with the Israeli Ministry of Health and the IDF, which is the Israeli army, to roll out the vaccine. And our program tonight is going to highlight part of that story. Before we begin improper, however, we do have a short video that we would like to show you. And this video, I believe, is going to give you a bit of a primer on the remarkable work that United Hatzalah does. And so, Jen, anytime you're ready to cue the video, we're happy to watch it.
The following video is about a guy, who is the fastest to save your life. But first, let me tell you what the problem is. Imagine you're in a remote area. You get a heart attack and you call an ambulance. For that ambulance to get to you, it has to drive all the way through traffic and narrow streets. And by the time it gets there, you are dead. This is how millions of people die every year. Ambulances are just not fast enough, and that is scary. Then I met this guy.
Hi, my name is Eli Beer.
This guy found a unique way to solve the ambulance problem. Here is how. It's very simple. The ambulance is too big, so Eli used a motorcycle and called it an ambucycle. Instead of employees, Eli found volunteers, regular people just like you and me, the teacher, the engineer, and the student. He trained them for months, gave them medical supplies and an ambucycle.
Drive carefully.
And he let them go back to their normal life. And every time someone calls for help, his technology finds the closest volunteer that can help.
Think of it like Uber, but this is for free and we save lives.
They drop whatever they're doing, arrive on the scene, and give medical care until the big ambulance shows up. This is how the difference between life and death looks like.
The first 3 minutes are the most important to save a life.
Eli's system is so fast that any phone call is answered in 3 seconds or less. And show up in 3 minutes or less.
And in most cases, we show up in 90 seconds or less.
So by the time you spent watching this video, someone is already at your house saving your life. This is the fastest medical emergency service in the world and the cheapest because it's entirely free.
By the way, our team is 5,000 volunteers and it's all sponsored by donations.
It's an organization that's 100% politics free, 100% cost free, 100% amazing, and 100%
Human.
People of different backgrounds volunteer to join Eli's team of medics. The Jews, the Muslims, the Christians, and everyone else.
I love the fact that I'm sitting here in United Hatzalah in between an ultra-Orthodox Jew and a Muslim.
All of them dedicated their time to save others regardless of religion or race.
Hello, how are you? Shalom, shalom.
And overall, they saved over 3.5 million people.
When my own father had a heart attack, the first volunteer who came to save him was a Muslim volunteer who was nearby, and my father is Jewish.
My dad got a heart attack. The first person to help, the fastest response was from a Jewish volunteer, and my dad is a Muslim.
What you're looking at is a group of people who came together under one organization called United Hatzalah to rise above politics, above money, above race, above religion, just to save lives.
Thank you so much, Jen. Well, that was a great video. And if you didn't know what United Hatzalah was before, you certainly have an idea now of what it does. And that video actually, Gavi, presents a number of really interesting streams of discussion. But before we get to the discussion part, I wonder if I could impose upon you, perhaps if you could take 7 or 10 minutes of your time and give for us, the listeners, kind of the executive summary about what United Hatzalah does, what some of the challenges that it faces now, and what are some of the outstanding successes that you see in the organization.
Great to be here with you, Rabbi. Thank you so much again. And to all of you for spending your evening with us. Hopefully I won't bore you too much and you'll find it pretty fascinating. And thank you again for starting with that video. It doesn't matter how many times I've seen it, I still get the goosebumps watching it and hearing that number of 3.5 million people that we've treated since we began. So again, it's just really just so humbling to hear that number. So again, good evening. I'm Gavi Friedson, and I'm originally from Boca Raton, Florida. It's where I was born and raised until the age of 10. And at 10 years old, I moved with my family to Israel. We made Aliyah. and I lived in Israel all the way up until about the age of 27. And a few years ago, I met my wife in Israel, and due to her work here in the United States, I moved back. But throughout my entire, I'd say from the age of 15 until today, I've always been involved with United Hatzalah, and it was just a perfect fit to really continue working for United Hatzalah and spreading that message all over the United States, North America, of what we do. So as you just saw in the video, we're an organization that is responsible for the first of the first responders, as I'd like to call it. I mean, we arrive on scene in any medical emergency in 3 minutes or less. In most cases, in big cities like Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, we're able to arrive in 90 seconds or less. It's pretty fascinating. When I started volunteering, and I'm one of the youngest ambucycle medics, and an ambucycle is a fully equipped medical motorcycle that we took and modified it so that we are able to respond to every emergency so quickly and efficiently. And because Israel had such a terrible traffic problem, most of you who've been there, I'm sure you've seen pre-COVID especially, but even now, it's not like in the States, at least here, I don't know what it's like in Canada with COVID. That was the one positive thing about COVID, was maybe the traffic kind of got a little less, but not in Israel. There's still really, really heavy traffic all the time. And obviously not during the lockdowns. But we, with our ambucycles, are able to swerve through the heavy traffic and get to the patient, because by the time the ambulance arrives, it's just a little bit too late. An ambulance typically takes anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes when our ambucycles would arrive in 90 seconds. Everything that's on the ambulance, we have EMTs, paramedics, doctors. They're fully equipped with all the medical medications and equipment that one would use in an ambulance in the motorcycle. We also have our volunteers use their private owned cars, ATVs, electric motorcycles, electric bikes. We really think out of the box of how to fit the volunteer with the best tools that he needs in order to respond to an emergency so quickly and efficiently and obviously safely. So as a volunteer, I've actually have been with this organization long enough that I've responded to over 10,000 emergencies. I started right during the end of the second Intifada when there were still bus bombings. And I've personally responded to over close to 100 terrorist attacks, I'd say. And just, every kind of typical call, from a traffic accident to a person who fell out of bed, to a fainting, to a stroke. I mean, we really see everything. But I'm just one volunteer of 6,000 volunteers. When I first started, Eli Beer, who founded this organization, we were just a small group of people trying to make a difference. I mean, he always had his goal was to get to 90 seconds, but we never thought that was possible. It was always a dream. And here we are today, where that dream became a reality. So it really is, again, humbling to see that we have 6,000 volunteers that are made up of Jews, Christians, Muslims, all backgrounds, all sectors of society and life in Israel. And we have a women's division, an Arab division, Jews, I mean, everything. Whoever wants to be a part of us can come train, become an EMT, and then get the tools that they need to go off and save lives in their community. And a lot of the times, people always ask us, what's the best way if you had an elevator pitch, in your 90 seconds, how do you explain United Hatzalah? The first thing that comes to mind is really Uber. Just the same way that Uber finds the 5 closest the 5 closest cars, we find the 5 closest medics, and we're able to get there really, really fast. And it's really just an incredible organization that does all of this for free. We don't charge for any of our services. And we're serving on the front lines. And who knew that a year ago that the world entered, one of the worst global pandemics in history. And we're all fighting through it. And Israel has always been known to really be a country that stands up and rises to the occasion. The mentality in Israel, the volunteers in Israel, the people of Israel. It's just really as you say, a light that shines onto the nation and into the world. And that's what they're doing. So, in February 21st of last year, exactly about a year ago, was our first case in Israel. It was the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, that actually arrived in Israel. And that was our first COVID positive patients. And then from there, it just spread. And at the beginning, not a lot of people knew what it was. It actually became very personal for our organization because our founder, Ellie Beer, for those who do not know, was in Miami, Florida at the time. And he got very sick with COVID virus. And again, no one really knew what it was at the time, but he ended up on a ventilator in serious condition for 34 days, for over a month. It was a very, very nerve-wracking time for all of us and anyone who knew him. We were continuously praying for his life, and he is so grateful to have made a full recovery, a real miracle. And I mean, his story alone is just really, I think he saved enough lives that God knew that he has a lot more to do here in this world, and knew that he has so much more to do that he had to just wake up and be with us. And it's just really a miracle that he was able to find the strength to make a full recovery. But what happened with COVID, I mean, it really kind of threw a curveball at us as being first responders, because all of a sudden our medics who are responding to 1,800 calls a day, all of a sudden we needed to make sure that our volunteers had the correct PPE and the right protective gear and the goggles and the masks, and every patient that we go to, if it's a person with shortness of breath, and the sacrifices that our volunteers were exposed to. I mean, we have one volunteer that ended up doing quarantine 7 times. And just imagine 7 times when he has wife and kids, but he's still, and if he had to go into an 8th time, he said he would, but he will never give up volunteering for United Hatzalah because of what he's managed to do. And some of those things are just everywhere from treating patients. As we are today, we're more focusing on the vaccine distribution. But before that, we had that element of the crisis where we were dealing with helping people in lockdown. We had elderly who couldn't leave their homes to get simple medications like diabetes medicine, insulin. We wanted to make sure that the COVID, whatever we were doing to fix COVID, we don't have worse problems across the board with every other medical issue, because strokes don't just stop happening and heart attacks don't just stop happening. And we really had to make sure that we had, our hand on the pulse on every issue. And that's what we did. And we worked with the health ministry in Israel. We worked with the army, with the IDF, with the Home Front Command. Being one of the leading health organizations in Israel, we were called upon to really rise to the occasion and offer our volunteers, and all of our volunteers really just rised up and said, yes, please tell us what we can do. So at the beginning, our volunteers were helping and assisting humanitarian causes. If there wasn't medical, then it was helping making sure that the elderly were able to get their medications. It was making sure that they were able to bring them any sorts of new clothes that they needed, because if this was months at a time, and I mean, Israel's just starting to come out of, I think it was its 3rd lockdown. So you can imagine what the sense of is in Israel. And today, our volunteers are working with transporting different regions from north to south, are using our ambulances to really get people, especially Holocaust survivors who just don't have the means to or how to get there, to help them get vaccinated. So we have a whole vaccination program. And on top of that, we're having our volunteers help with the distribution of the vaccines. They all did an extra course through the health ministry so that they can help provide the shot in the arms to make it just a much faster process. And that is why when you look at the world today and you see that in the United States, we've got about 10% vaccinated. I saw that in Canada, you're only at about 500,000 people. The UK is at 20%. And then guess what? Israel is at 90%. I mean, we're on 4 million people. It's fascinating how that happened. I think a lot of it, whether you like him or not, and obviously not to get into politics, the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, really was able to use his connections. I mean, he's been there forever. So you'd think he really knows the who's of the world. And that's exactly what he did. He made some phone calls, and it happens to be a little fun fact that at the leadership of both Moderna and Pfizer, there actually happened to be several Jews at the leadership there, and Bibi obviously cut some great deals. I think part of it was using Israel as a lab, in the sense of it's a lot of data, because we're leading in the world with what we're doing, is being shared with is going to be shared with Israel. And I think the largest healthcare provider recently, Clalit, is the Covert Vaccinations there. That's they just did in cooperation with Harvard University, one of the largest studies of how effective is the vaccine. And they also came out with a 94% effectiveness. and 0 death rate. So obviously, like, it was just great data. But not to forget, with all these vaccines that are coming out, they're still under emergency use at the moment. So there's still so much to learn. So I think, Bibi was one of the first, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, was one of the first to really, cut whatever deal that he did. But, he was able to really get the majority of his country vaccinated. Now, obviously, it's very different, and we'll get to the Q&A in a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's
regarding Canada.
If I can say, it's an excellent point. It is very, very different. Gabi, a lot of Canadians, although it's probably closer a little bit in Canada than it is in the States, the medical system in Israel is significantly different. The medical delivery system there, there are 4 major HMOs, or Kupot Cholim, and this iteration of Israel's HMO system was birthed in 1979, and the combination of the proximity of the population to the medical delivery places, and not surprisingly, the high saturation rate of the digitalization of the medical community really has enabled Israel. And for the record, it's probably a signpost for most of the world, lessons to learn about how to implement national healthcare plans, for the country. But I wanted to ask you, because I was always curious about this, how much do each one of those ambulance cycles cost?
Great question. So the AmbuCycle is $36,000, and it is a fully—
And that's US.
US. It's US, I believe, and Rachel has the correct Canadian number, but it is a fully equipped medical motorcycle. So it includes the birth kit. By the way, my favorite is a birth kit. I've delivered 9 babies on the job. So thank you. So obviously I'm going to have to say that's my favorite, but it includes the birth kit, the defibrillator, the resuscitation kit, diabetic kit. If you're ALS, which is advanced life support for a paramedic or a doctor, then it has all the medication kit. It has everything. It covers the insurance, the training, the helmet, all the tune-ups that the motorcycle needs, and it lasts for about 4 to 5 years, obviously depending on how many calls you go. So just to put this into perspective, when I've gone through 4 AmbuCycles in my career, obviously on the back of a motorcycle, and I would respond to almost 160 emergencies a month. So quite a lot. And there's even other medics out there that respond to 180 to 200. And so, it's just very—
I wanted to ask you, so would you be riding, even if you were going to work, let's say you worked in Intel in Hatzalah, and would you take your ambulance cycle with you to work, or would you drive your regular car?
That is the success to our model. I mean, the fact is our volunteers are all equipped with a walkie-talkie Bluebird system, which is what we use to communicate. It's got a GPS. The dispatch knows if you call Hatzalah, then it finds, as you're still on the phone with the emergency, whatever it is you're calling in, the dispatcher is finding the 5 closest medics. Most of the time, the emergency is already getting pinged out to the closest volunteers. So I can't tell you how many times I was in the supermarket filling up my cart, I got an emergency and I just left my cart, my motorcycle, my AmbuCycle was outside, and it just becomes a way of life that we become accustomed to. But the fact is, I
wanted to ask you, were there moments, like now, I mean, you've been doing this for a very long time, Gavi. Were there moments where you got pinged for a call and you weren't able to go because of some family responsibility? And could you tell the people who are on the call what that feeling is like when you can't go on a call?
It's very frustrating. I mean, for me, most of the time, I guess I was pretty single till pretty late. So I guess the worst is when I was on a date. but
actually, you could probably earn points with the girl for it,
right? But I would say, it depends. I went to one of my closest friends. He's a doctor now in Jerusalem. He's a gynecologist, Aryeh Yafe. I remember him on his Shabbat Chatan, right before he was getting married. On Shabbat, he was about to have an aliyah to the Torah, and the pager went off, and he ran out it was a woman who was hit by a bus right outside the great synagogue. And, we were all there, we're all medics, we're all friends. We're sitting in the synagogue on Shabbat morning, waiting for him to, have his blessing and the aliyah to the Torah. And then we get a call and we just see everyone's pager go off and we all ran out of the shul, not thinking twice to respond. And we kind of didn't let him. And I think he was very anxious, but he was, up next. And there was enough medics to take care of it so that he was fine. But you could see just how anxious he was to know that there was something happening there that he couldn't solve. And that's just one example. And obviously we expect our volunteers to be on call 24/7, but completely understand that if someone is a teacher and he's got kids in the classroom, or you're at home watching the kids, and your wife is out of town and you don't have the capabilities of leaving, that he can't. And it's okay if he can't, because that is how our system is set up, that it finds another volunteer that'll cover that region. And that's why we have so many volunteers in certain areas to cover the map for exactly that reason.
If someone was to ask you, and I have an inkling of an answer, but I'm really curious to see and hear what your thoughts are. I'll put the question like this. I don't believe, and I wonder if you do, if the success that United Hatzalah enjoys in Israel, if that's something that could be duplicated in other countries in the world.
Sure thing. And pre-COVID, and now as well, we are really working with other countries. We had the Deputy Prime Minister of India in 2018 visit our headquarters. We had paramedics come from Australia. We had paramedics in Vancouver, Canada, come to visit us, our headquarters. I'm still in touch with some of those paramedics. I've made friends from all over the world who come to learn from us. We have a great model that is very successful. Obviously, it's a little complicated depending on the geography and what the environment's like in each place. Like a place, obviously like Toronto, might be a little bit difficult in the winter time because of the weather. So you can't really you can't implement an ambu cycle. But you could still have, but you do have a local Hatzalah there that does phenomenal work and saves a lot of lives. I mean, you have countries all over the world that are learning from us. We're trying to work in places. We have in Mexico as well, in Panama. The ambu cycle saves lives. The model of having volunteers on call be the first responder saves lives. It's a little bit, it's unique in each place, in each scenario. In the United States, there's unions. I don't know what it's like with the bureaucracy in Canada, but here it's a little bit, how the volunteer works with the paid ambulance driver. Because again, all of our volunteers do this from the beauty of their heart. They do not solicit, they do not ask for money, they do not charge for their services. It is something that becomes a way of life. And the wives years ago, there weren't a lot of women in our organization. Now we have women that are leaving their husbands, and vice versa. And it's really, and we have teams that are both medics and they leave their kids, and I'm sure their kids will become medics. And it's really just amazing to see how well this organization is just growing and how people want to be a part of it. And I think I don't want our organization to become famous during tragedy, during a pandemic or during, the terrorist attacks and things like that. When people see our vests on the news, like, we do so much behind the scenes to help just the humanitarian causes. I mean, to help the Holocaust survivors in Israel get the medications they need on a daily basis, to make sure that there's no one left alone in Israel, in their apartments, that everyone can get the help they need. And we do this every single day, above just responding to the emergency calls. There
was a wonderful book written by the author. His name is Sebastian Junger. You're probably familiar with his work because there was a movie made on another book that he wrote, and George Clooney was in the movie, about a terrible hurricane where some fishermen were lost at sea. And anyway, he wrote a book called The Tribe, and he asked this question. The question he asked, Gavi, is that the incident rates of suicide, depression, of people who are honorably discharged from military service is astronomically high in Western developed countries, United States, Britain, France, all those countries. And what he found is not that there's an absence of it in Israel, but that the numbers comparatively are less. So Junger, in the book called The Tribe, asks the question, why? And his answer in part is that because Israel is a country where it's mandatory service, everyone goes through it. So when you're discharged from the army, You're in a society where everyone has been through something similar to what you've been through. In other words, you don't feel so alone. It seems to me, and I wonder your thoughts on this, it seems to me that perhaps it's no surprise that an organization like United Hatzalah began in Israel because of the ethos of things, of how the society actually functions. You know, we live, particularly in North America, but in the larger sense, in the Western world, we live very atomized, fragmented lives. In some respects, what the lockdowns of Corona have done is only aggravate and accelerate the way that we've been living now for about 10 years. People live very silo-like lives. But the interesting thing about what's different in Israel is that there's a greater social fabric feeling in the country that does come in part, I think in large part, because of the military ethos of things that develop in the country. And so I guess the question for you is, do you think that that communal sense, the drive to save lives, the volunteerism, 6,000 volunteers in a country of 9 million people, people like you said, who are prepared to drop everything. You're on a date with somebody, you're doing food shopping, and you just leave your cart there. It's an incredible thought. On a daily basis, living, never knowing what the call is going to be. Do you think that there's something very particularly Israeli and Jewish in that?
Yes, 1,000 times yes.
Tell me what.
The mentality is everything. And I think, you know, if we look back to the foundation and the creation of the state, from, you know, a lot of people being Holocaust survivors and understanding what they just came from, and to starting to build Israel. And then immediately as they were building Israel, another war. And then after that war, another war. And until today, it's a country that understands what it means to survive. It's a country that understands what it means to defend itself. It's a country that understands what it means to step up and rise to the occasion and sacrifice, and to be there and to be on the front lines. And it's also a country that knows what it means to serve. And as a person who not only volunteered with United Hatzalah, but also served in the IDF, and was also a medic, and has, you know, been kind of exposed to all sectors of society in Israel. I've gotten to meet and talk to so many people, all the way from up north to down south, and throughout my different, you know, years living in Israel, from college, from, I'd say even earlier, from high school to the military to volunteering, and really getting to talk to everybody. And even if, God forbid, tomorrow there was another war in Israel, the majority of the military would be calling up its reservists. So most Israelis, you know, are even still till today have to still do the military service. My brother is still a tank commander, and he's 38. It is just a different mentality, you know, and I think that's part of the success for United Hatzalah. I also urge anyone who really finds this evening very interesting to go to YouTube and follow the TED Talk that Eli Beer, our founder, did. And he actually shares the story on a TED Talk of how United Hatzalah was created and his personal journey of what exactly happened. But that's exactly, you are so right. It is not just the Jewish values, but just the people of Israel who understand that, if not me, then who? And it really is, I think, what empowers a lot of our volunteers to continue to do so, and to sacrifice so much. And, you know, it's a lot of people who are, especially if you're married with kids, to drop everything to go respond, to not know how long that will be. If it's a CPR, it could be anywhere between 5 to 45 minutes that you're gone from your family. If, God forbid, it's a terrorist attack, it could be 2 hours. It can be anywhere from 10 minutes to just help your neighbor back in bed, an elder lady who had fallen out of bed during the night. I mean, there's just so much fulfillment as well, knowing that you're helping your fellow neighbor, your fellow stranger, your fellow community. There's just so much. And I think that's why our volunteers thrive and just love what they do, because I've yet to find, that's why I'm still doing it. I mean, I've yet to find something else that can bring so much passion and fulfillment to someone's life than saving a person's life. And that's why, I guess, like I said in the beginning, when I heard we've treated over 3.5 million people, and I know a lot of these volunteers personally, it just brings so much pride, and just inspiration, especially because, you know, when you're watching the news, you just feel like sometimes it can get you down. And then when you hear about an organization like United Hatzalah, it really lifts you up, and it just brings sheds a whole nother sort of light to the world with the things that we're doing.
I wanted to ask you, what are some of the particular things, you hinted on it in your wonderful introduction, what are some of the things in particular that United Hatzalah is doing in reference to the vaccine distribution in Israel? For the people who are listening, Israel now is very close to the 5 million on the first dose at least vaccination. Roughly 30% of Israel's population is not eligible yet for a vaccine because they're 16 and under. In a country of about 9 million people, that would leave roughly about 6.3 million people maximum who could be vaccinated. They're close to 5 now. From what I've read, Gavi, they're estimating about 5 to 600,000 of that million and 1.3 million. So roughly almost half are people who are incapable of leaving where they live. They're, like you said, they are very elderly Holocaust survivors. They're people with developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, where they physically are incapable of getting to a vaccination center. Is United Hatzalah doing anything on that end in the delivery system?
Yes, and we actually created a program working with Homefront Command and with the health ministry to locate people that need to be vaccinated that just don't have the means to, and we're working with them. We're also sending our volunteers with different nurses that are able to vaccinate. There's different areas around Israel that we've created that they can go to, and we have ambulances all day taking people back and forth. I mean, if you follow our Twitter feed, you'll see like we just had this the holiday of Purim, and our volunteers were taking a Holocaust survivor and they were dancing with her in the ambulance and bringing her some joy, because this last year has just been, I mean, just horrible. And for a person who's been locked in their home like that for so long. I just want to mention something that you were talking about, the vaccine, and what's so successful in Israel is the fact that as of next week, so at the moment, they're now allowing ages 16 and above, which is the first country to do that. And now the health minister was talking about, I think in about 2 weeks from now, starting at the age of 12 and getting them vaccinated as well. So it's really just like, we're always pushing it. I think, that's what Israelis are really good at, and trying to really push out getting more and more people vaccinated. But that is our organization is working tirelessly. I mean, every single day to make sure that we have people getting where they need to be. And if they can't make it, then we'll bring it to them. We're really finding ways to make sure that anyone who wants it can get it. And I mean, Pfizer, we're just very lucky that we have the vaccines to be able to distribute. That's another, Kola Kavod, I'd say, to the government for work, for making sure that they have that, but then for also understanding that an organization like Hatzalah is so vital to the success. Now, I volunteered for many years also, in Magen David Adom in the ambulance service. And I worked on the ambulance there, and I would get to the call within 15, 20 minutes. And I was always in shock and awe about the volunteer who was there first, who was able to really calm the senses, calm down the environment of all that stress. It feels like eternity. 1 minute in a moment of crisis feels like a long time. And to be able to arrive there in 90 seconds is just, I mean, I hope no one ever experiences that, but it's a big difference. And those volunteers work with us. I mean, a lot of them moved over and volunteer with us. I mean, we have a mixture of both. At the end of the day, we're Israelis, we're Jews working together. And the best part is we're working with each other, from the Jews to the Christians, to the Arabs. It's really just a unique sense of community. And it's just really just, there's no other organization like it. And that's why, I think we're helping the national healthcare, community with the crisis. And that's why we're succeeding. I mean, to get to 90% of vaccination rate is amazing. I mean, you just saw yesterday the cruise ships. I was in Miami last week, and there's a lot of cruise ships just sitting there for over a year. And Royal Caribbean, or one of the other ones, just announced that they're sending their cruise ships to Israel because they're going to start being able to take people who are fully vaccinated on cruises again. And they're going to go to Greece. And I think slowly you're going to start to see Israel lead the world in opening up.
Well, we certainly look forward to that, because we've all been under a lot of house arrest these past months. It's a little bit tiring. I wanted to ask you a question because inevitably Eli made a wonderful comment on it in the video. He reminded the people who were watching it not once and not twice, but like a good salesman, 3 times. And that is, all of this is done by donations. And do you have, I hope you do you have an idea what the annual budget is? In other words, what's the annual ask that United Hatzalah needs to raise in order to keep this remarkable organization functioning?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to touch one other thing that you mentioned earlier about the mental health crisis. That is so important that people don't even, people seem to forget that we as volunteers and just on the front lines, the spike in loneliness, in alcohol, in suicides has really spiked tremendously. It's heartbreaking. I have so many friends that are responding to emergencies. I mean, just think about it this past year, especially in Israel with the lockdowns and over 1 million unemployed. And a lot of our own volunteers, were also suffering and they were still volunteering. But like you said, that mental, we stepped up to the occasion and we have an entire unit devoted to just the mental health aspects, a psychotrauma unit, which is responding also 24/7 to help the mental health aspects of this virus and just anything in general. And not only to help the citizens of Israel, but also our volunteers who are being exposed to this every single day. But a great question regarding our budget. Look, we're now at 6,000 volunteers, with every single volunteer needing the PPE and just the basic walkie-talkie and defibrillator and life-saving equipment. Our budget's almost about $30 million a year, US dollars. It's quite high. I remember when I came back to the States, for many years growing up in Israel, I always had my motorcycle with my kit, with all my medical bandages. I never in my life, I think, went to the pharmacy if I cut myself to get a bandage. And when I just recently got back to the United States and I went to the pharmacy to buy some bandages and I saw the price on gauze pads and I was, whoa, you got to be kidding. Why didn't I take my bag from Israel? And medical equipment is expensive. And the fact that, and it still blows people's minds that I say we're free. We don't charge for any of the things we do. So imagine, almost 2,000 calls every single day. Our volunteers are using the equipment they need, and we don't hold back. Whatever it is that we need to do to save a person's life, we use it. Whether it's 2 gauze pads, it's 3. Whether it's a tourniquet, whatever it is, we make sure that our volunteers are well equipped. And that's why between that and the motorcycles and just the training courses, and we have all of our costs, why it is so high. Yes. And obviously COVID was a big curveball, thrown at the whole world, but especially an organization like us, who's really just dependent on donations, to keep us thriving the way we are.
Wonderful. Well, that's a big number every year. But there's, as you know from your experience, there's lots of people with big hearts, and they see the work that people do to, like you said, not just show up where there's an emergency and administer first aid, but the broader spectrum of caring for human beings, the mental health issues and the elderly and things like that is probably the untold underbelly story, which is the bigger story about United Hatzalah. But we have some questions. Actually, one just came and I'd like to ask it of you. This question's a little bit of an Ipcha Mistabra question. What should Canada learn from Israel about what not to do around COVID vaccinations?
Wow. What not to do? I think promise. I mean, it's hard because the government in Israel can make these mistakes just as much, but I think promising a number, I think the Prime Minister in Canada just said that they expect everyone to be vaccinated by September in Canada. Here in the United States, they said about May. In Israel, they never gave an actual timeline. They never promised anything.
But he did. He said by Pesach.
Did he say by Pesach?
Yeah, Bibi said, "Oh, this year in the Pesach, be with the grandparents."
Okay, so I would say if that was the case, then I'm wrong. But I was saying, don't promise a date because you just don't know. It is so difficult, especially with these emergency dose usages, getting it out. I know that Canada doesn't have a production plant on its own soil. And I think that is one of the biggest problems right now of why they can't just get as many as they can and getting them from where they need. And the whole world is trying to, it's just like the masks in the beginning. Everyone was trying to get masks and they couldn't get it. But the good news is there's now Johnson & Johnson. There's another one. I know Israel's actually, there's a biotech company in Nest Siona that is working on developing a vaccine. I don't know if they're going to end up using it. It's in phase 2 of the trials for Israelis, because by the time it's ready, I'm thinking most of Israel would already be vaccinated, but maybe they could then use that for the rest of the world. And maybe that vaccine will end up in Canada before you know it. What not to, I really think there's a lot they could learn. I think they can get, like you said, we have a lot of Israelis who all served in the military who were paramedics or EMTs that have the training that you can then take and then give them a day course and learn how to, give the shot in the arm. And you can create basketball stadiums and sports centers and places that are not being used at the moment, and create facilities where you can distribute and train volunteers to distribute the vaccine. So you're not just dependent on the pharmacy.
I think your comment's really interesting because it explains, I think that there's 2 elements to the conversation. One element of the conversation is securing the vaccine. The second part is distributing it and actually putting it into people. And on both sides of that equation, and I suspect, Gavi, that between me and you and the other 50 people who are listening, Israel's ability to get and distribute the vaccines into people made it a resoundingly clear, easy decision for Pfizer to look at them and say, this is the laboratory we're going to use to see how this works. For the record, from what I've read, there were a number of other countries that were competing at the same time as Israel was to be the test bed for the Pfizer vaccine. And there's no question, Bibi himself commented in the Israeli newspapers that Borla, who's a Greek Jew, he said he appealed to his Yiddish neshama, as he said, his matzvon Yehudi, his Jewish conscience. But ultimately, and Canada was one of those countries, it was reported, that was intensely lobbying Pfizer to get them, to have them also become the laboratory. But in the end, Israel's ability to get the vaccines into people. And I think that's still here, Gavi. People have reasonable, understandable concerns because everything seems, at least on the ground here in Canada, very late to the party. They've had a year of looking at this. They've had a few months looking at Israel do this. And here locally in the province, the state of Ontario, they don't even have a reservation system online up and running.
Right.
So that's the concern.
Definitely.
I have another question.
No, there's definitely things that need to be fixed there. And I would like to just remind people that, again, Israel is the size of New Jersey. It's 9 million people, but there's also one port of entry. It's very much easier to lock down Israel the way they did than other countries. And having a person with the Yiddish neshama, like you said, is definitely very helpful. And that's what he appealed to. And kudos to him if that was the case. There's still a lot to be researched. I know that, people who are getting vaccinated in Israel on this new on the passport, it actually says it expires in 6 months. And now Pfizer is still trying to figure out, do they need a booster? Do they not? People do not know yet. There's just so much data that we're collecting and learning. The passport system here, we don't really have a passport system. You get a card from the CDC, but Israel doesn't even recognize that at the moment. They're starting to open up the airport to 1,000 passengers a day. But if I get vaccinated here in the United States and I go to Israel, I still have to quarantine. It's as if I didn't vaccinate because they don't even know if that card is legitimate, can easily counterfeit it. So I think the whole world is trying to figure everything out. I think, yes, Canada definitely its leadership needs to see that and learn from countries like Israel and the United States that are kind of leading in the way right now. But the next couple of months are very, very, very important. And I hope, they manage to get the vaccines they need and more people distributed. I'd also like to just add that in Canada for United Hatzalah, we've raised last year about $1 million towards our budget came from Canada. So I'm very proud and very honored to say thank you to any of those who did help us. Because a lot of that money directly goes to this life-saving efforts in Israel. And I encourage you also after this session to really get involved and learn from us. And when you do get to Israel on your next visit, come visit us, come see us, see our headquarters, feel the vibe, meet the volunteers, meet the Arab, meet the headquarters. Our headquarters is located in the entrance to Jerusalem. It's a beautiful building. It is really very interactive and engaging to see how our volunteers operate, and to see a Jewish person sitting next to a Muslim and working together. And everything that you read about the Middle East is really just not the case. It's all thrown out the window when you're sitting there visiting us. But the fact is, our organization is very hands-on, and we take pride in our partnership with our fellow donors and supporters. The fact is that if you help sponsor an ambucycle, it's not just like writing a check and not knowing what happens with it. You get actual updates of where that ambucycle is, who's responding, who's the medic. You get to meet the volunteer, you get to hear the stories. It is really just something that is so special and so unique to United Hatzalah.
I have to say, I'm not surprised that Israel, Canada, despite being a small Jewish community, relatively speaking, in comparison to the United States or other Jewish communities, Canadian Jews are extraordinarily philanthropic. They have high levels of Jewish identity, and they are passionately Zionistic in large numbers. So I'm not surprised.
Yes, to add one more thing, I just want, excellent point. Canada, to answer the question previously asked, Canada can learn to improve its infrastructure by working and developing its strategic communication and cooperation with healthcare, military, government. That triangle that we have, which is really successful in Israel, if that was implemented in Canada, it would be a whole nother ballgame.
Yes, thank you.
So,
I suspect in the minds of many people who are listening, we're recognizing that's a long football field for the Canadian government and whatnot, but that's a whole other discussion. Gavi, I want to thank you so much for your time. I suspect that this is going to be the first of, God willing, a number of different programs and exposures that the Toronto community and the Canadian community at large is going to have to the remarkable work that United Hatzalah does, the enormous work that it undertakes, and also the enormous budget that is required to save people's lives. And when you're looking at $60 million a year, that is a daily call of things that are needed. And I know that the people on this call with me, that they're passionately sensitive about the cause that United Hatzalah is devoted to. I just want to turn for a moment and ask Rachel if there's anything, Rachel, that you would like to share before we close the evening off.
Unmute. No, I'm thrilled that Gavi, thank you, and Rabbi Aaron, thank you, and Beshalom, thank you. I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to present this tonight. It's a great opportunity to tell a wonderful story. Just like Gavi said, sometimes the stories you hear out of Israel, well, there's some different perspectives, and I think the beauty that, different people, that you can have a Jew and a Muslim working together side by side and sort of sharing the same common life-saving mission is a wonderful story. And I mean, that's what grabs me. I feel so passionate about the organization, and I'm so thrilled to share it. And this is an incredible platform. I mean, COVID gives a great chance to sort of tell a different side of the story, but there's so many other compelling elements. And I'm thrilled to have had everyone's attention tonight. Thank you both.
No, thank you. It's been an honor to be a part of it. And Gavi, if you come to Toronto,
I would love to. Okay? I'm just waiting for the borders to open up.
But not in the winter.
Not in the winter.
Spring. Have a great evening, everyone. And thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight.
My pleasure.